Well, it's 11 a.m. here. What time is it over there?
Yeah, 11
11,
a.m.
right? Okay. So good morning. I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if to say good morning or not, but can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and the type of work that you do, and just a little bit about your background?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a healer, mentor, and teacher. And basically, I work with women to unlock their unique brilliance. Um, my background, just started coming into all of this naturally. I started working on horses many, many years ago as a physical therapist and started working on their bodies. And then all of a sudden, I just got taught energy work with them through the angels and the other beings I had no idea even existed, honestly. And then I moved into animal communication from that and was just set on doing animal communication. I started getting messages like, no, you're gonna start working with people. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And it was like, yeah, you are. And then sure enough, I started working with the owners and seeing their energy in session, seeing where their blocks were affecting their animals. And it all was just very organic in nature. So that's been several years, going on over 10 years now. So yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome. Um, yeah, that's really cool. And how do you pronounce your name? Because I wasn't sure if I was pronouncing it correctly to
Yeah.
myself, but
Alara.
okay, Alara.
Uh,
Okay, so I was pronouncing it correctly.
mhm.
What kind of got you started with doing this type of work? Like, what was the inspiration, or how did it kind of start?
I mean, like I said, it was really organic. I've always been a teacher my entire life. Even as a child, I used to like I had a whiteboard in my room and I'd line up all my stuffed animals and I would teach them.
Mhm.
So, and then I was a scuba diving instructor for many years. So I've always been a natural teacher and natural mentor. And this whole line of work just showed up through the animals actually. And, they just taught it to me. And I was guided into working with humans. But, since doing it's just been such a profoundly fulfilling work,
Mhm.
and I've just expanded greatly within it because I'm really big myself on, self development, self expansion. And so it just makes sense that if that's always been my focus and what I like to do for myself, that it makes sense that I would help others do the same.
Yeah, that's always been like a very interesting to me. Like, I've I haven't really like I don't have a lot of experience with that. I mean, I've done like I guess like the chakra cleanses before, the tarot readings, things like that. And so I'm not really like too knowledgeable on the work, just everything about it. So, but I've always been interested. So it just sounds very interesting.
Yeah, the chakras are a great place to
Mhm.
start. There's so much information. I always talk greatly about the chakras because that's where I started, in
Mhm.
my own personal practice, just meditating on my chakras, just because I was guided to do so. And I learned so much about myself through my chakras.
Mhm. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me in my podcast, and taking just time out of your day. I mean, time is important. So I appreciate you coming on and recording with me. So the topic that I wanted to cover today was the importance of vulnerability.
Mhm.
And the reason why I chose this topic is because it's always been hard for me to be vulnerable. And so it's something that I'm consistently like working on, and so I thought it was important to talk about and kind of like educate other people about it. So, um, for you, how does that show up with the work that you do? Like, just the importance of being vulnerable. What does vulnerable even mean?
Yeah, I love this topic. This is one of my favorites. And I love how you say that it's always been challenging for yourself because it was always very challenging for me as well. And I think that's one of the reasons it's one of my favorite topics because I I never understood being vulnerable. I never understood like sharing our stories or exposing ourselves. And for me, I was always the type that would, anytime I was going through a hard time, I wouldn't speak about it. And then once I was over it, I would talk about it because I didn't want to expose that vulnerability.
Mhm.
And through my process of my own personal journey, I started realizing that as I shared my vulnerable moments with the people, my followers, and my clients, it really helped them connect to themselves.
Mhm.
And I also noticed that just in my relationships, the more that I was vulnerable, the more that it enticed and invited the person that I was with to open up to me. So it basically started to like build deeper layers of trust.
Mhm.
But, it's a funny conversation for me because I think of vulnerability much more than just, I would say, the typical definition that to be vulnerable is to, talk about ourselves or
Mhm.
expose things about ourselves that maybe we're not completely, in acceptance of or wanting other people to see or know. But I think of vulnerability as this space of being really available both to ourselves and to others, meaning being available to our own emotions all the time. Like no matter what we're feeling, we're here and we're available to ourselves. And also being available to other people's emotions and feelings. And so for me, that's what vulnerability really is. It's about being present in the moment, and when we do this, there is an incredible amount of power, of potential that basically we tap into because we're allowing ourselves to be present and to be open. Because that's really what vulnerability is. It's the
Mhm.
openness of ourself, right? So it's not just exposing the things that like maybe we don't want others to see or we're not really certain about. It's really like the opening up. It's like the flower opening up, right? Like for a flower to be the beauty of what that flower is, it has to be vulnerable. It has to like expose its most
Mhm.
innards,
Yeah.
the most center of its
Mhm.
being, right? By opening. And that's really to me what vulnerability is. It's really opening up and allowing ourselves to open, which through that is our brilliance, is our genius, is our power.
That is so beautifully stated. And I think that's a really powerful definition of it because you're right. Like a lot of times when we think about being vulnerable, we think about being vulnerable in front of others or sharing about ourselves to others. But I've never thought about it in that way of being vulnerable with myself too. And so that's really powerful. And I love the way that you kind of explained it because it is true. I mean, even like I think for myself, like having grown up in a with within a family that didn't share a lot about themselves, didn't talk a lot about emotions or whatever was going on, like you kind of become like conditioned to not do it. And so as you get older, like it's not something that just comes natural, like being open and vulnerable even within yourself. So yeah, I like the way that you define that.
Yeah, I mean, our potential also, known as our Shakti, is available, like our pure potential. And in the
Mhm.
quantum field in this moment, there's just this pure potentiality. But we can't access that potentiality unless we are open. And that takes the energy of presence, right? Being very present and available. And so we start with ourselves. And this is what I love to teach because when we think of vulnerability, we always think about other people. And yeah, that
Mhm.
can be kind of intense initially, right? So if you first take a vulnerability just to yourself, right? And like, how can I be more vulnerable, open, and exposed to me?
Mhm.
Then you start like taking these steps to opening up, which ultimately, once you get comfortable with that in yourself, it becomes actually surprisingly easy to be vulnerable with others. And one of the practices I've had with my clients is I told her just to like, one in particular, I told her just to, really like say out loud to herself, when she wasn't with other people, what she was feeling like, oh, I'm feeling really frustrated right now, like to actually say that out loud to herself. Because how often do we do that? How often do we
Mhm.
really acknowledge our emotions to ourselves? And even saying it out
Mhm.
loud to ourselves starts this process. Like I said, if you can say it out loud to yourself, we can start the process of saying it to others.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is a good first step because a lot of the times I feel, even with myself, like, I try to hide negative emotions, or like we're taught that negative emotions are bad and like we don't want to feel them, we don't want to express them. And so, yeah, like it could be really hard to kind of even acknowledge them, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm feeling upset or I'm feeling like sad about this. Like a lot of people don't want to feel that way. So they'll just kind of like shove those emotions off to the side. So, yeah, that's really good. Um, w- what has been like with your experience, like with working with people? Um, what have been some of the things that make it difficult to become vulnerable, even within ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, we're just not taught it, you know. So we're taught it's exactly what you said. Like the negative emotions are negative and wrong, and we shouldn't have them. You know, when we're little kids, we're pretty much shut down by society, and our unique brilliance is shut down. So the part that's like just you know, the thing that makes you absolutely unique is your genius. But our society hasn't really been open to that. We've been like, no, you need to fit into this box, specifically in school systems, right? Like every kid learns the same, but that's not true. So there's this tiny little box that we're supposed to fit into. And in order to fit into that box, we kind of like shut down a lot of our own uniqueness in
Mhm.
order to fit into that box. And so when we go to be vulnerable, we're really trying to like expose that uniqueness. But it's been, for most of us, our entire life that we have closed that off and basically said that part of us is not accepted, right? Which is unloving to self. And it is in a level like denying ourselves to be creators, right? To be
Mhm.
consciousness, to be source energy. We're saying that part of us is not that, which creates separation and creates self hate.
Mhm.
So when we do that, we've done it for so long. Like that's just our way of being. So to like open that back up, it's scary because we just don't know whether it's going to be received and accepted by others, because it usually most likely wasn't when we were a child. That's again why sometimes just doing it first with ourselves can be so powerful, as you start to open up that box, so to speak, to yourself from yourself and letting your unique brilliance out to yourself, and you get comfortable with that and you start to love yourself for all that you are, then it becomes really delightful to expose that to others. But yeah, it's like that absolute uniqueness that I call it, the genius. It's
Mhm.
stored away, it's tucked away because it hasn't been received.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me feel like happy, like, oh, I'm a
Mhm.
genius. I have this inside of me, right? That it's so powerful. And yeah, I agree with that for sure. I like a lot of the times it's fear of rejection, fear of not knowing how we're going to be perceived, right? And like we said, previous experiences too. Maybe we've opened up before and it just didn't work out for us. So we're kind of like afraid and
Mhm.
we're like, yeah, like we don't want to experience any type of like discomfort or shame and things that could come. I feel like we've been conditioned that way. So for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah. How do you, I know you said that you work with kind of being able to acknowledge our own feelings to ourselves, like I'm feeling upset or I'm feeling whatever. Um, what are some challenges that you feel could come up with that or have come up with that in your experience?
Definitely a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
You know, there are some emotions like anger, frustration, and hatred that we've just deemed like not okay. And in the eyes of creation, nothing is not okay. Nothing is bad or good. There is no duality. Like humanity is experiencing duality, right? We define something as negative and positive, bad and good, right? But when you start to really see everything from a space of love, you really allow yourself to experience it. And one of the most beautiful things I ever went through was I in meditation, I always am taught by myself through my meditations, right? And in my meditation one time, I was exposed to a great deal of hate, which wasn't mine. Like I went into meditation, I've been meditating for a very long time. And all of a sudden, this immense energy of hate came into my space to the point that my body was like contorting. It was so intense, but I knew it wasn't mine. And I have really worked with myself to be able to sit and remain vulnerable no matter what I'm experiencing. Because to me, that's really where power lies. And so I stayed open. I continued to allow myself to feel it and not identify with it. And then all of a sudden I saw this tiny little seed, and then this seed burst into light and it flipped. And all of a sudden I felt immense love, like so much love that my body was also contorting. And I just heard from my higher self, you see, it's the same. Love and hate are the same coin. They're just the opposite, the head and the tail, so to speak, of the same coin. It's all the same energy. But we have termed it negative or bad or not okay in society. Like anger is one of the ones I personally really dealt with, that I felt like this isn't okay, right? I can't be angry. I can't feel anger. And so we are always going to face our own belief structures around particular feelings and emotions. One that I also find that people really struggle with is they think that if they feel it, they are it, right? And that's the identification with it. Like if I feel anger, that must mean like I'm an angry person, right? But there's like a saying that I think it's in Irish, that like instead of saying I am angry, it's like anger is upon me. Which I really love that. Like, oh, anger is just in my space. That doesn't mean I am angry, right? Like in English, we have this way of like identifying with it. And so the hardest thing is to be able just to feel emotion and understand that you're fundamentally not that emotion, because that emotion can come and it can go and you remain. So that's the basis of emotional intelligence, is to realize that emotions are just states of being. They pass like the weather does. And so if you can just allow yourself to be really present with it and remain present and really feel it, there's so much to be learned from every single emotional state. It's there because it's trying to show you something. And so if we try to allow ourselves just to feel it without identifying it, without trying to change it, then we really can learn from it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because like you said, feelings are not facts, right? That's how I kind of understand it just within myself. Um, because yeah, a lot of the times, like if let's say I'm feeling angry about something, I'll start like beating myself up over it. Like, why am I feeling this way? What's wrong with me? But the truth is that being angry is not, like you said, it doesn't mean like I'm a bad, angry person. Yeah, like it's an emotion that is going to come and then I'm going to get through and it's going to go. So I really like the way that you kind of explained it um, with the weather and everything. Um,
Yeah,
so how, yeah.
I had such a powerful journey with anger because my family kind of carries a lot of anger. And so it was a difficult one for me. But when I finally just really allowed myself to experience it, I realized anger is like one of the most powerful energies. It's what creates revolutions. It's meant to help us change something. And so now it's like I don't invite anger, like, oh, come on, I want to be angry. But like, yeah, if it wants to be in my space, I'm like, sweet, what wants to be changed? And how can I channel this energy into that change?
That's a really good way to reframe things too.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the times when people are feeling angry, like even myself, like I said, it's a bad thing, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So I like the way that we could reframe it like, okay, like you said, like, what do we want to change? Like, what's going on, you know? So for someone who's never, or for someone who's listening and maybe has never thought about it in this way, they want to start practicing like sitting with their anger, for example, or like, how would you get someone started with doing that? Like, how can someone
Mm.
get started?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The first thing always is to breathe. We take our breath for granted, but our breath is so important. It if you're able to breathe into your belly,
Yeah.
like breathe into your diaphragm, and as you inhale, your belly comes out a little bit, then you're accessing your vagus nerve, which is the rest and digest. So it's meant to actually relax you. So, especially when we're feeling really intense emotions, breathing is vital to just being able to be present with it. But I always recommend for anybody, if you're just starting on your journey, to always practice with like the not so intense emotions,
Mhm.
right? Like you want to get good when you're like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit of something. Practice with that. And then when the intense emotion come, you already have an idea of how to do it. But yes, the first thing is just simply to breathe. Breathe into your belly and just bring your awareness to your breath and just follow the inhale and exhale, bringing it in, letting it go, and just kind of allow your awareness to fall on your breath. That will instantly start to first bring you into your body, bring you into the present moment. And like I said, really engage the digest and rest part of your vagus nerve, okay, which is your neurological system. And then step two is just to observe from the observer state, right? Which is like as if you're a third person watching yourself. So again, you're not identified. You're just like, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling this. I'm feeling that. This is a sensation in my body. This is how it feels in my space. And the observer kind of pulls us out of subject object, like I am this, and it pulls us out into a subtly higher level of consciousness
Mhm.
where there's almost like a buffer, is how I word it. So you watch it almost from like a third person, which again, it creates a little bit of subtlety there where you're not fully like engrossed in it.
Mhm.
And so if you breathe and observe yourself without judgment, it's almost like, this is what I'm feeling. What does that feel like? Like a space of curiosity. What does anger really feel like when I really allow it, when I'm really here, breathing with it, and then just observe
Mhm.
yourself? Then that's where, again, you really start to understand what that emotion is trying to show you. But also, you create this space for the emotion to just work through you. Because what we try to deny, push away, actually has more power over us. So when we really bring our awareness to something, we are bringing in acceptance, and acceptance is unconditional love. And that's the energy of transmutation. That's what will ultimately shift the energy itself.
Yeah, I love that. And that is something that I always told, because I work in the mental health field. And so
Mm.
um, in the past, I've had like therapy clients, and that's something that I've always told clients is the importance of practicing these techniques like breathing, right? Like you said, even when you're feeling well,
Mm-hmm.
and not waiting until until you're, until
Yeah.
you're like angry and upset.
Yes.
Um, because especially if it's something that's new to you, if you're already feeling angry, like it's not something that you're gonna in the moment be like, okay, let me practice my breathing. Like
Mhm.
it takes a lot of practice.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely like super important to practice it even when you're not feeling, upset or angry, whatever that emotion, like definitely important to practice it even before then with your positive emotions. It's good practice. I did want to ask you, I love the way that you talked about looking at ourselves like kind of in a third person.
Mm-hmm.
How would that look like? Like I'm trying to like if you could give an example or just kind of describe it a little bit more. How would that look like if I'm feeling angry? I'm trying to practice like my breathing, right? Like looking at myself from a third person, like how would that look like?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So yeah, the observer witness mode is what it's called, right?
Mhm.
So again, you're just with yourself, preferably you're breathing,
Mhm.
comfortably and again into your belly. And then you're just watching again, like what are the sensations in your body right now? Like what does anger actually feel like in your body? Because there's chemical reactions with these emotions, right? So
Mhm.
we feel things, sensations in our body. So that's one thing, like what is my body feeling, and
Okay.
just observing that, like, oh, there's like my core is tight and tense, or like I feel this like tension in my body. So you're just saying that, oh, like I
Okay.
feel tension in my, oh, like my stomach is in a knot, oh, my shoulders are hunched over, oh, my hands, whatever it is, my hands are clenched, whatever it is,
Mm.
as far as like the body sensation. And then, as well as what are the thoughts running
Mhm.
through your head? Like, oh my gosh, I can see the stream of thoughts coming through with this anger, right? And what is that thought about? Like maybe you're upset. I'm going to pick something really simple, right? Like
Mhm.
about like road rage, right? So you're driving along and all of a sudden like somebody cuts you off and you start getting angry, right? So again, you start to just observe how your body is feeling, and then what are your thoughts? Like, why did that person do that? Oh my gosh, are they
Mhm.
stupid? What's wrong with, you just observe
Yeah.
all the thoughts, let the thoughts come without judgment. Okay. Not saying I shouldn't be having these thoughts. Why am I thinking these things? Just what are those thoughts, and just letting them stream through. And it's kind of like you're just listening to
Mhm.
yourself. So that's
Okay.
all the observer mode, and anything else that is showing up. Those are kind of the two really good ones to start with. And
Mhm.
as you practice this, it gets much, much more subtle. You start to tap into the more subtle levels of yourself and really the energy behind those emotions.
Mhm. Yeah, I really like that because thinking back to like I guess the beginning of my journey, or when I first started like learning about all of these things, if when I was sitting with my negative emotions, like it wasn't easy for me because I hadn't practiced, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't easy for me to acknowledge like what my body was feeling, like when I was angry, or the thoughts, like you said, that I was having when I was feeling angry. So it wasn't easy for me to do that. Like it takes practice, but I like the way that you kind of put it into like a third person
Mhm.
perspective, because that kind of makes it kind of solidifies it for me. And I never thought about it that way. Is that okay? Like I have this third person observing me
Mhm.
and asking me these questions like,
Mhm.
how do you feel anger in your body? Like, what are you feeling?
Mhm.
What are the thoughts that are coming up? And things like that. I think that that would for sure, like, that's super helpful. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
again,
that.
it kind of takes away like the personal
Hmm.
aspect of it, because anger isn't personal to us, right? Everybody has these emotions. So when we allow ourselves that third person, then it kind of pulls like, oh, this is about me, rather than again like, oh, anger is upon me. Like I
Hmm.
love that so much. Like, oh,
Yeah.
anger is upon me. How do I feel when anger is upon me?
Yeah. Next time I'm angry, I'm gonna say that.
It's
Anger
almost
is
like
upon
anger
me.
is its own thing, and it's like coming into your space, and you're like, how does it feel when anger's in my space? Like if it's a
Yeah.
person. Like what is it that animated movie with the joy and the
Oh
sadness and
yes.
the anger?
I was actually watching that last night. That's so funny. Yeah. Yeah, that's so funny. Like, here comes anger again.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And I think even sitting with our own emotions, I think like with time, like you said, like it'll even help us. I think that's a good first step. And then like with that, possibly like later on, like we'd be able to be more vulnerable with others because we're already kind of like we already know how to be vulnerable with
Yeah.
ourselves, right? So yeah, that's
Yeah.
really good. And that reminds me like of myself. I'm kind of like thinking of it in a linear way.
Hmm.
I've done a lot of like work within myself, like even just going to school for, I mean, becoming a therapist and stuff, like it kind of forces you to start doing like your own work. And So I've kind of been doing that. And then especially in the past 2 to 3 years, I feel like I really just, yeah, like I just took off in my journey. But even now, like, I started this podcast and I have a blog where I kind of wanted to force myself to be more vulnerable with others because
Mm.
I've always been like a very private person because I just don't want to share about myself. And
Mm.
so even doing this, like it has been like, yeah, like it's been scary, like at the start of everything and sharing about my story and myself and my emotions. And so I was thinking about that, like, why was this so hard for me to just
Mm.
open up and share about myself? And I think that's why this topic was just like, yeah, important for me because I know a lot of people kind of go through the same thing
Yeah.
where it's really hard to just be open. And it's like, okay, why? Like, what do I do?
And but here you are doing it. So I mean, kudos to you.
Thank you. And I think a lot of that, like we talked about, was just like fear of what others might think, or, like fear of rejection and stuff like that. But
It's so interesting because we fear it and yet we yearn for it so badly. Like we yearn for the connection and intimacy that's created through vulnerability. Because when we're able to really sit with somebody and just be ourselves, which is what vulnerability is,
mhm,
it's being authentic, we feel at home, right? We feel like received and just like, oh my gosh, that person gets me. But they get us because we're really being us. How
yeah,
can somebody get us? How can somebody accept us when we're not really being us?
mhm, that's true. And I was actually reading something. I'm reading a book right now that kind of talked a little bit about vulnerability and how transparency helps with vulnerability. Because when you're not showing who you truly are, like you're kind of choosing to be someone else in a
Exactly.
way, like out of fear of what people might think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a lot of strength to
Yes.
really be transparent. And, like we said, like exercising it will only make it stronger, like exercising it within ourselves.
The really beautiful thing about it is one time I had this channel in with one of my sessions and it really blew my mind. I was really in love with it is,
Mhm.
like we think that if we hide things away, that somehow keeps us safe, right? But again, when we're hiding ourselves away, we're not really allowing ourselves to be our own genius. And the truth of it is that when we actually expose all of the things that we're trying to hide away, what can anybody hold over us?
Mhm.
The way that it channeled in was if like the warrior drops the shield and like shows itself to another, like I always channel spiritual kung fu. The kung fu is just like the kung fu master's like, here I am, like this is who I am, I'm showing up. Like it throws the enemy or whatever off because they're not trying to hide behind anything. They're just showing themselves. That's really, really powerful. Like when we really show ourselves, it's so powerful. It means we have nothing to hide.
Mhm.
We're not scared of who we are, even if we
Mhm.
are somewhat scared of who we are, right?
Yeah.
But like it speaks volumes to other people, and it's so beautiful because it means that when we do that, like there's really nothing for us to hide, and therefore we're really stepping into our power. It really allows us embodiment, because when we're trying to hide ourselves, we're not really embodied, right?
Mhm.
Of our true nature, of our genius, like I said. So when we just start exposing it, like, okay, you know what, I'm just tired of this, I'm tired of not being myself,
Mhm.
and so I'm just going to be courageous, because it takes courage. I'm going to be courageous and I'm going to show everything. There's really nothing then that can be used against you, because at that point, you are in acceptance of yourself.
Yeah. And it's also just so freeing because it's so, it's exhausting to like hide
Yes.
yourself like you can only do it for so long. And um yeah, I mean, at least for me, when I started being a little bit more open about myself, it just felt so like liberating, like kind of like a weight was lifted off my shoulders.
Mhm.
Because like you said, you're just able to be yourself
Mhm.
and like not worry about other people's reactions and what they might say. And so,
Yeah, because again, when you're being authentic, you're opening up to your own Shakti, right? Your own
mhm,
potentiality. So that's power. So that's why it's not exhausting. It's the opposite. It lifts you up, it lights you up, it expands you. Whereas when you're not, you're closing yourself down to your own inner power. And that's why it's exhausting.
yeah. Um, I did want to ask you, um, is there such thing as being too vulnerable?
I think there's something as like to share too much.
Okay.
Like I feel like, yeah, again, to me, vulnerability is not like, hey, I'm going to go out on social media and tell everybody
Uh-huh.
everything, right? Like there's TMI, there's just too much
Mm-hmm.
information. Like we don't need to. To me, there's a time and a space where you're in a particular moment and there's something to be shared, right? But again, vulnerability is not just what we share, it's about really
Mm-hmm.
showing up as yourself. So there's never too much of that. There's never a moment where showing up as yourself is too much. If we
Mm-hmm.
feel that, that's just a limiting belief. But yeah, are there times where we can share too much information? Yeah, I definitely. Because to me, that's not what vulnerability is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I love that. Yeah, because when you change the way that, yeah, like when you change the way that you think about vulnerability, which I now have thanks to you, like it's more, it can also be within yourself. Like it's not just with others for sure. I like that. Um, so what are some types of, I guess, in what ways have being vulnerable with yourself, what are some of the positive, I guess, changes or things that have come out of it?
Hmm.
Or even with any of your clients that you noticed or have experienced?
Yeah, I mean, just vaguely, when I'm very vulnerable with my clients, especially my one-on-ones, but with all of my clients. And again, I just find that people are like, oh my gosh, I'm going through the same thing. I've been experiencing that, or I feel that. And so it just helps people to feel seen, even though I'm just sharing myself, if that makes sense. They feel seen through my experience. But to be very vulnerable and to give specificity, again, with anger for me, when I really opened up to my own inner anger, I had it felt like a freight train that was coming on me. And it was a particular part of my journey of my spiritual development. And I had to just succumb to it. And I like went to the floor and started like practically throwing a tantrum, and I was screaming, and I like all of this rage was coming out of me. And I let it. I just totally surrendered to it. And this happened about 3 times. And at the time, I had somebody that was very, very supportive that was with me. And so I felt very safe. And I just did it. Anytime it come up, I'd be like, all right, here it comes. And I'd just scream and I'd kick and I'd hit and I'd just like, ah. And it totally blew me open. The last time it happened, I I just screamed. I was like hitting the floor, and the person was like holding me, and I was just screaming and hitting the floor. And then I just stopped, and I got the message to go up into meditation. So I went upstairs and I went into meditation, and I immediately started crying. And I was just
Mhm.
crying as I was shown all of my anger. And like for the first time ever, it almost makes me want to cry right now. I had this immense gratitude for my anger. For like all of my life, I had tried to push it down and like not be it. And just by totally just opening up to it and like loving myself in the process of it, I was just sitting there crying, bawling my eyes out, like grateful for it. And it was like, it just cracked me open. And since then, I had a completely different relationship with anger, both of my own anger and other people's anger. And I can hold a really powerful and very strong place for people that are angry. Like I have no judgment at all. Like people can rage, they can do whatever they want. I can stand right there with them and I hold no judgment towards them. But I had to go through that in myself to be able to do that for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds really, because I'm picturing like, you know, after so long of holding it all in, like that's even that like is exhausting, right? To just
Yeah.
hold all of your anger in and to have it finally released, like that must, yeah, like that must have been just so relieving.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It really, really was. Because
Yeah.
I thought that it would consume me and it
Mhm.
didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so being vulnerable for me, for sure, like you said, has helped with connection to others. And it's also helped me kind of with like my own healing, like just being able to talk about things and meditate, you know, just by myself and things like that. Like it's helped a lot with that for sure. And yeah, I like that.
Mhm.
Uh and I think with being vulnerable, like you also kind of learn to love yourself,
Mhm.
like you said. And I've kind of had that in my experience too. It's just being able to accept like all of the quote unquote bad
Mhm.
emotions that I have, or the bad things, you know, from my past, whatever is seen as bad, kind of learning to accept it and just be happy. So definitely has helped with like loving myself too.
Yeah. And which of course enables us to hold more space for others.
Mhm. Yeah. So where can people find more information? You're so knowledgeable and I loved I love the way that you explain things. Like it's just so easy to understand. And
Mhm.
where can people find more information, like if they were wanted to look or learn
Yeah.
more about all this?
I have my website, alarasage.com, and I have a lot on YouTube. So I do a lot of free content. So my YouTube, you can just search Alara Sage on YouTube. And like I said, I have a lot of content there that I'm constantly creating new videos and putting it up there. I'm also on Instagram at Alara Sage. So those are like my three main, I would say, Instagram, YouTube, and my website.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Definitely.
And I also, if anyone wants to check out my blog, I did write a blog on something similar to this on how to sit with our negative emotions. And so if you want to read more about it, you can also read my blog on it on my website. But
Yeah, I would love to see that.
thank you. But thank you so much, Alara. This was just like a very like quick, but just filled with so much like knowledge, like just so much information. And I feel like I really learned a lot.
Yay, this has been so enjoyable for me.
Yeah,
And I definitely want to see your blog. So please send it to me.
I will. Thank you so much, Alara.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Susie.
Thank you for watching my video. Remember to like and subscribe to my channel for more cool mental health podcasts and vlogs. And also visit my website, www.imperfectmellow.com, for more content. We also have some really cool freebies on there. And feel free to add me on Instagram at ZeppySue for more cool content. See you later. Bye.